Reaction to the URC final then. Now the dust has settled. Now a fourth different name has been etched onto that trophy in 4 years, which doesn't that just speak to the quality of the URC? That it's only now in its 4th year that the favourite has actually gone on and won the tournament. And in doing so, Leinster have banished years of pain. Well, I say banished. I don't know. I think the pain of those Champions Cup final defeats are going to linger for quite a long time until they do get the 5th star above their crest. But some of the pain of that has been taken away. The pain intensifies for the Bulls, and I think the big takeaway there is you can take losing on any given day, and Leinster are clearly an exceptional rugby team who turned up and they were not messing about and they came to play. I think what I'd find really, really disappointing if I was a Bulls fan, and this is where the fallout and the discussion might be on this video and with you in the comments, please, is the frustration is not firing a shot, is not playing a good game in the biggest match. And there's an argument that the Bulls played their poorest game of the season in the biggest match of the season. How much do you attribute that to Leinster being amazing, and how much do you attribute that to the Bulls being poor? And if you say that the Bulls were poor, where does the blame lie with that one? I will come on to what Jake White has had to say in the aftermath of the game. It's quite interesting, and I definitely want to know your comments on that. So I'll get through all of that. I'm Tim. This is Egg Chasers. Thank you for watching. As you can see, I am now back home, back in my normal surroundings, and it was the travel from Greece back to the UK, which meant that there wasn't able to be a video in the immediate aftermath of the game because I had no signal whatsoever at Kalamata Airport. So, c'est la vie. You go to these lovely, beautiful, unspoilt and relatively untravelled parts of the world, the internet's going to be a little bit dodgy. So sorry about that. But at least now there's more to get our teeth into because, like I say, the comments from Jake White after the game, I'll obviously get into the actual match itself, but I think some of the bigger conversations are maybe more interesting. But before I get there, let's just acknowledge the result and the performance from Leinster, which was just exceptional. 32 points to 7. That scoreline did not make it feel like a final. Made it feel like a procession, really, after the first half hour, 19-0 up, and then that period just before half-time where Leinster's defence went to town on the Bulls and shut them out before half-time. And it was a very, very impressive performance from Leinster. That looked like a test match quality performance, and it was too much for the Bulls. And like I say, I'm sure Bulls fans aren't sat there going, we should have won. I would have expected us to have won. They knew they were the underdogs going into it. And Leinster, if they turned up and performed, I'm not sure there's any team in the URC that would have beaten them. However, the quality of the Bulls' performance was massively disappointing. And as a result, didn't make it feel completely like a final should feel. Also, when you add to that the fact that the nature of the competition, the fact that there was only, 45,000 people in the stadium, which is a decent effort, but in the, massive mecca of Irish sport that is Croke Park in Dublin, just didn't make it quite feel like a final in the same way. I don't want to be negative or have a bit of a downer because the URC competition has been amazing and there's so much good stuff to talk about, which I want to focus on. Let me just first say, before we actually get there, the occasion, I don't know. There was so much to love after the final whistle. There was the James Lowe lifting up Jack Conan's shirt on the trophy lift. Bearing in mind, this is a moment for Jack Conan because Caelan Doris was injured, so he was stood to one side. Cian Healy was stood to the other side, proper church in his final time wearing blue for Leinster. And the two of them are stood alongside Jack Conan, who's lifting the trophy. This might be a picture that would go on his wall that his kids and grandkids and generations of his family afterwards might look at. And James Lowe has pulled his shirt up. Done him dirty there. But quite funny. And do you know what I also loved was the kids presenting the players with the medals. I think they were from Clontarf All Ability Team. And just, do you know what? Rugby does lovely touches like that. I just love that. It's the sort of thing that just makes you choke up a little bit, makes you love the sport a little bit more, doesn't it? But Leinster are bottlers no more. They are bottlers no more. They still, like I say, are not going to be satisfied. I know this from chatting to their fans, not going to be satisfied until that 5th star is above their crest in the Champions Cup. But this will feel sweet after years of near misses and pain and poor performances. They absolutely dominated this one from start to finish. and just dropped the hammer on the Bulls, who had no answer. And like I say, maybe no team in the URC, when Leinster are playing like that, maybe no team has an answer, because Bulls are far from the only team to have felt the wrath of Leinster. And actually, that's how I would describe it. They played the semi-final angry. And Ryan Baird's man of the match interview last week sounded angry. Joe McCarthy coming out and saying, we know everyone hates Leinster. They really fed off the frustration of the past and the fact that there were little sniggers from other parts that Leinster hadn't managed to. They were playing angry. They built a siege mentality, and they came out with massive intent. And bearing in mind, all the chat building up to this one was that the Bulls scrum is coming to Dublin to come and take on Andrew Porter, and no Tadhg Furlong take on Tom Clarkson. How good was he, Thomas Clarkson? And it was the reverse. It was the reverse. The Bulls never got their scrum going. The Bulls didn't get their line out going and didn't manage to disrupt Leinster on either of those fundamentals, and the rest just fell in place from there. And the question is going to be asked about, was that the Bulls underperforming because they were exhausted from the semi-final last week, from travelling to Europe? Is it individuals in terms of the players, or is Jake White going to come in the firing line again? Because once again, in big games, I mean, they'll look back to last year against Glasgow at home as the game they should have won, were favourites to win and didn't. This one, it's more frustrating, I would imagine, if you're a Bulls fan, because you did not give a good account of yourselves on the biggest stage. Not that you didn't win, because the win was always going to be a tough ask. But that performance was not a tough ask. As I say, I will come to Jake White and what he said after the game. Just very, very interested to know what you think. Also, I think in terms of coaches, I do think it's important, and I'm going to do it now, to give Leo Cullen credit. Because whenever the things were going bad, when they were losing those Champions Cup finals narrowly and heartbreakingly, or semi-finals because they rotated some players, Leo Cullen was rightly getting the criticism for some of those decisions that he made. Equally, when your team goes out and absolutely smashes the opposition in a final and they bring their best game, then the head coach should get the credit. So well done, Leo Cullen. You can't have it both ways. You can't say it's the players or Jacques Nienaber and not Leo Cullen when they do it well, but then blame Leo Cullen when they don't. So fair play, Leo Cullen. Only right and proper to say that. It'll be interesting to see whether, nevertheless, in order to get that Champions Cup star and in order to build another Leinster dynasty, they feel like they need to evolve the leadership at the very top. That's going to be an interesting one to watch. But for now, enjoy it, Leo, because his team were outstanding. And the way it started, that intent of pure power, obviously having thought about and watched the brilliant Bulls forward performance last week, watched the way they took apart Oxenche and Bongi and Banambi and Vincent Koch at scrum time, Wilco Lowe going to town, Quadzilla, up against Andrew Porter, and Leinster obviously were ready and waiting and expecting, and the response they gave it, you have to take your hat off. And that first try from Jack Conan sort of spoke volumes about it. Go to the corner, line out time, get them all on, nice and set. And there was no nuance, there was no subtlety. Dan Sheehan, bang, direct round the edge. Jack Conan, quick, straight over, try time. And it was the same with Josh van der Fleer's try. In fact, there's one image that kind of paints a picture. I mean, first and foremost, there's Josh van der Fleer scoring it. But before that try, where Josh van der Fleer literally goes through the middle, the heart of the Bulls pack to score. No going around the outside, no nuance or footwork, just I'm going right through the middle of you. Marco van Staden, his opposite number, and I know they're 6 and 7, that's just the different numbers that South Africa wear versus Ireland, but both open side flankers. Marco van Staden was on the floor trying to pull pull the maul to the floor. He wasn't alone, it wasn't just him. Bulls had no answer head-to-head. They were trying to pull it down illegally. Leinster rumbled straight over the top of them. And then Thomas Clarkson, I mean, doing an amazing job at scrum time. No Tadhg Furlong, and you think, well, that's a little bit of an advantage given the strength of the Bulls scrum. I know they didn't have Steenekamp and that's a factor. No Hanekom or for the direct physicality in ball carrying, but Leinster were brutal. And that brutality came through in their defence as well. And that period just before half-time where they managed to shut the Bulls out was maybe the most significant moment in the match. And what's really interesting, when you look at the Champions Cup semi-final that they lost to Northampton, Northampton had 20 entries into Leinster's 22. The Bulls had 3. The Bulls had 3 entries into their 22 the entire game. That is because their discipline was really good, so they didn't give them cheap entries with penalties. It's because their fundamentals were really good and they weren't coughing up scrum pens or line-out mistakes, which they have done previously. And just really, really smart game management. Getting the ball in the right part of the field and putting the squeeze on them. And they managed to do that without Jemison Gibson Park as well, who quite often is the guy that steers the team around the park. So seriously impressive. And the Bulls, because they didn't have that physical dominance that they would have needed to have come up with a result, they were left trying to pull rabbits out of hats, and Villy LaRue trying to pull off a magic trick, and very few of his tricks actually paid off. So they were left with no answer. And that comes to Jake White and what he had to say. Jake White in the aftermath of the game. And I'm really interested to know what you think about this. He basically said, we weren't playing a club team, we're playing a test team. He mentioned all the internationals they have. He says he needs better players if he's going to be able to compete. 19-0 up and they're able to bring R.G. Snyman on. The biggest cheer from the crowd was for Geordie Barrett. I think he said Bowden Barrett by accident, but you know what he meant. So it's very clear and simple from Jake White's perspective. The reason that he cannot compete is because he doesn't have the players that Leinster have. Now, you can absolutely see what he's saying. But I also wonder, what are his teammates thinking when they're hearing that? They finished second in the URC, not that far behind Leinster. Leinster held no fear for them. They beat them this season. They beat all the Irish teams. They've only been beaten by Stormers, Sharks and Scarlets this season in the URC. I don't know. It's a strange message that one sends. I can see the logic of what Jake White's saying, but the way he said it and the optics of it, I don't know. I'm really interested to know what you think, because was that self-preservation for Jake White? Does he truly believe he cannot compete? I mean, first and foremost, I think it's important to say, and maybe if I were Jake White, I would have said, well, I could talk about the quality of the Leinster squad, the fact they've got World Cup winners on their bench, world-class players in their lineup, stacked right across their team, loads of British and Irish Lions, etc., etc., all the things he did make. But you can only really make that point when your team actually does its job and when the fundamentals of your team work, because that's the issue with this. He's complaining about the things he can't control, and he didn't take care of the things that the Bulls can control. And I don't know where you land with that one, falling on the coach, falling on the players, probably a little bit of both. But I didn't much like... I kind of agree, broadly speaking, with what Jake White was saying, that this Leinster team is sensational. However, you've got to go out and do your job as well, so that if Leinster have a little bit of an off day or if they make mistakes, you capitalise. There were too many Bulls players and the team overall didn't go out and do their job. And that's got nothing whatsoever to do with Leinster. It could be to do with, a 1 week turnaround from an epic semi-final and a travel to the other half of the world. And I'd be sympathetic to that. If Jake White had turned around and said, look, I don't want to talk, well done Leinster, we didn't play our best, and I take responsibility for that. I do also want to say, I think a 1 week turnaround when you have teams that could be playing each other from opposite sides of the world, I think that's something the URC maybe need to look at. Then I think Jake White would have a real point. And I would be an advocate of a 2 week break between a semi-final and a final for exactly this reason. Although that said, didn't affect Glasgow last year, did it? They went to the home of the Bulls and performed then. So is there something deeper going on, that when it comes to the crunch, the Bulls haven't delivered, and consistently so? Or is it, as Jake White says, simply a case of Leinster have that good of a team? And there's no doubt they absolutely do. and there were some strong performances across the park, and there were some really poor ones from the Bulls side of things. I do think also there's like mentality-wise, there was a few moments where the Bulls did have the opportunity. They did have some territory. They were on those few occasions, they were in Leinster's 22, particularly that period just before half-time. They were just going one man out hit. There was a risk aversion for the Bulls. And I guess I can understand how that happens. If you've played rugby, you understand what it's like being, overwhelmed, blitzed by a team, and it starts to do funny things to your mentality and you tighten up. But there were times where there was 3-on-1 overlaps and the Bulls didn't use it. They were going for the power game. They'd clearly got in their heads, we're taking them on up front, and didn't react on the field to what was happening when the situation changed. And I guess that made it slightly disappointing from a neutral's perspective that the scoreline was 32-7. But you have to hold your hands up. You have to just take your cap off to Leinster and say, fair play. They were absolutely magic. And if they'd brought that sort of intensity for 80 minutes in previous finals, then this might not have been their first trophy in quite some time. I'm sure they had a big old night in Dublin, deservedly so. Let me know what you think about Leinster, about the Bulls, about Leo Cullen, about Jake White, about the spectacle of a final, about the 1 week break between the semi-final and final, all those other things mixed up in it. Let me know what you think. And I will definitely, there's going to be more fallout from this one. And I mean, it's the middle of June. It's only a couple of weeks and we're into international rugby and I cannot wait. So it's going to be a busy old time on the channel. So thank you for your support. I appreciate it. Get your comments stuck in down below. I will see you on the next one.